Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome. Today's topic is Resalest Remarkable Books, number 53. The first book today is Ohio Town, A Portrait of Xenia by Helen Hooven Santmeyer, 1962. The author, she also wrote a book called And Ladies of the Club, ... And Ladies of the Club, which very long, but I never read, but I thought the title was very unique. This book about that I mentioned, Ohio Town, about Xenia. This is an incredible book, one of the best books I've ever read. What a beautiful book! Now, the author, Helen Hooven Santmeyer, was born in 1895 in Xenia, Ohio, and she's writing about her childhood and this town where she grew up. And the book appealed to me because my great-grandfather lived in that town growing up. He was in an orphanage from 1870 to 1886. So as I read this book, I thought, well, the people, the environment, and the people that she's describing, he knew a little bit earlier. Pretty much the same town, although people were younger. My great-great-grandfather was in the Civil War, and his name was Tom Zook, and he died 5 years after the war from dysentery, and then his widow felt like she couldn't take care of the 3 children, and she put the 2 younger boys in this orphanage in Xenia. So I read the book to try to learn more about his childhood situation and the town he grew up in. And the author was born in 1895, so it was actually that era was my grandmother's era, when my dad's mother. She was born around 3 years later in Marion, Ohio. Xenia is in Ohio's south. It's in the west, central western part of Ohio, and so this is really something. And the thing that got me as I read this book, she's writing about basically Xenia in the early, what she remembers, which would be the early parts of the 20th century, since she was born in 1895, so around the early 1900s into the 1910s. And what I got from the book is what America has lost, what we've lost as our country has changed so dramatically. The things we've lost: community, nature, railroads, simple pleasures, plants, trees, animals, books, walking, local stores you could walk to, people, friends, and family. And I'd lived in Marion, Ohio a couple of years before. I read this book 2010, and I gave up because I wasn't strong enough, and it was the town where my father grew up, and so I wrote in my book diary, I want another crack at Marion, Ohio. Of course, and the thing that got me about this book is how knowledgeable people were in the early 20th century about birds, the different species of birds. She was extremely knowledgeable, and I don't think it was just her. And I know my father's mother, she was really into birds. She would talk about different birds. She'd write a letter and mention about she saw this bird or that bird. My father really knew birds. And see, the thing is, in general, I believe Americans knew their birds more, because we were a simpler country back then. Now everyone's so busy today. And she also knew these different animals. It was Xenia is a small town surrounded by farmland. She knew the different trees. She could identify different trees, and again, I think this was a part of American life back then. People knew these things. We've lost that. Very few people know many birds or the different trees and so forth. And like I said, local stores you can walk to. Community. See, this is the thing we've lost. People, neighbors knowing each other, extended family. Storytelling, sitting on your porch, and and people walking by, and saying hi to your neighbor, because people very often, we were much more of a walking country back then. If you lived in a small town, chances are you could walk to the grocery store, walk to work. My dad's father, he walked to work in Marion, Ohio, and I know so really something. Railroads, for transportation, if you wanted to go a little bit farther, you wanted to go to another town. And so I just love this book. I adored it. It was a beautiful story. I thought, my gosh. And the things that we've lost, we can get back again. We can rediscover these things. Storytelling, right? reading books out loud, and neighborhood. We have to reestablish. We've become such an urban country. You have suburbs, and suburbs are surrounded by other suburbs, and so we've really lost touch with nature. People are busy driving a long time to work, coming home. We watch TV. We're indoors. It might be a beautiful day. We're indoors watching TV or video games, and we've lost the great outdoors. Children playing outside, unstructured play for children. Now everything's so organized, by adults. And so I love this book. I really did, and I believe we can get this back. We can, because what. It's not that hard. It's just a choice we can make to get back some of the things that we've lost. Amazing book. Wonderful. The next book is Here and Then by George Ella Lyon, 1994. This is another beautiful book. It's time travel. It's a time travel book back to the Civil War, United States. And this character helps a woman who is overwhelmed with sick and wounded and dying soldiers, and she was in need of supplies. And so this Abby, this character, she buys medical supplies in 1994 and brings them to 1862, back in time, to help Eliza Hoskins. Good history, wonderful history. This is the thing. I think this is the thing that killed my great-great-grandfather, is all the suffering that he witnessed. The American Civil War, military technology had developed and to inflict massive casualties, all these guys getting killed by cannon fire, but they didn't have the medical care, hadn't developed. So you had all these fellows who would, would have to be, they'd have gangrene from, they'd be wounded, and if they didn't have, they'd have to have a limb amputated, arms and legs, to save their lives. And the medical personnel were overwhelmed. There was just too many casualties. They didn't have enough people to take care of the wounded. And I know my great great grandfather. He got sick. He was in a military hospital in Cairo, Illinois, and all these fellows, all the suffering, all the guys who had lost an arm and a leg or multiple limbs, and so he was overwhelmed, I believe, by that suffering. He died of dysentery, but I think also of depression as well, because all the suffering that he endured. So this is a nice book because it shows someone trying to help this individual who was overwhelmed by the situation. All these suffering people that she was trying to take care of, and wounded men, and she didn't have the supplies or the personnel to do so. So she got help from the future. Wonderful book. The next book is Feathered Serpent by Colin Falconer, 2002. Oh my gosh. I was really reading some incredible books here, and this is another one. When I talk, these are called Resalest remarkable books. Well, this is it's not an exaggeration here. Incredible book. This is about the story about the Spanish conquest of Mexico by Hernan Cortez and the Spanish from 1519 to 1521. He got help from an Aztec woman named Malinali. An incredible book. The story of greed, courage, cruelty, superstition, and the brutal Aztec Empire replaced by the brutal Spanish. Religious war. What horrors men will commit for wealth, power, and fame. The thing is, the Spanish have a pretty bad reputation because of what they did in their empire, because they were pretty cruel around the world, in Latin America, in the Philippines, Guam, and what's now Latin America. And the thing is, what's made it tough for Mexico is that the pre-Spanish power, the Aztec Empire, was actually worse. Was worse than the Spanish. Yeah, because at least the Spanish brought Christianity, even if the Spanish themselves weren't really practicing Christianity, because they were not kind and peaceful, they were violent. But at least the ideal was there. The Christianity is the ideals of Christianity are peaceful and loving and kind. But the Aztec Empire and their religion was very violent. They had a religion that was based on human sacrifice. They had these pyramids, and these individuals, they would be chosen for death. Their lives would be taken to supposedly satisfy the Aztec gods, and then they'd cut they would cut their chest open, rip out the heart, and the Aztec priests would eat the hearts of these victims. And they'd do that in the tops of these pyramids, and these priests would have like blood all over them. They were just it was just horrible. So actually, you'd have to say that the Spanish conquest of Mexico was a good thing, because the Aztecs were hated by these other peoples who were happy to see them overthrown and cooperated with the Spanish invasion. Kind of hard to believe that the Spanish were just a handful, just a small number, a couple hundred guys, defeated this empire of millions, and really something. And so, and if you look at Mexico today, the problems that Mexico has with violence, these drug dealers and so forth, you have to believe, I think, that it goes back not only to the Spanish era, but also to the Aztec era, the pre-Spanish era, which was so violent and horrible. And so it was one of the things that was very interesting is the Aztecs. They didn't believe in. They believed in war. You had to fight one-on-one. So there was this scene where the Spanish could have been overwhelmed by the Aztec numbers. And they could have killed them all, but they thought, no, we have to fight one-on-one. So they were just, and the Spanish had superior weapons. I think they had these swords that they'd kill these. So that like the Aztecs were just waiting in line to fight individual Spaniards and get killed. And if they had just rushed them all, they could have killed all the Spanish, but they didn't do it because it wasn't a part of their belief system. They didn't believe. They didn't think it was right. So these Spanish guys, one after another, an Aztec guy'd come forward and they just killed the guy, and then the next guy'd come forward and all these dead bodies. So, and this Aztec woman Malinali, she had her reasons for. She probably believed that it was a good thing for the Aztecs to be overthrown, and I think she developed a relationship with Cortez. The thing that's pitiful about Cortez, he's the great conqueror of Mexico. But the problem is, the Spanish, their empire was lawless. They didn't have the rule of law, So and so there was all that as individuals they were interested in becoming rich from conquest. But when they all wanted to go back to Spain. They dreamed of going back to Spain, and having a mansion, and having money, having women and food and drink and so forth. That was their dream. It's a very selfish, materialistic, greedy dream. But the thing is, back in Spain, since Spain was actually, most people were very poor, people would be jealous. And somebody would make up a story like, oh, this guy is a traitor. They'd make up a story. And then his wealth would be confiscated based on a lie. And then Cortez, this has happened to him. He went back to Spain. He was a rich guy and so forth. And then this happened to him. His wealth was taken away, and he died a poor, a bitter man, broken man. And so in a way, he got what he deserved because because what he had done really was not he wasn't right. But I would have to say that the Spanish conquest of Mexico was a good thing because the Aztec Empire was horrible. It was just so brutal and cruel, and they had this very evil religion that did need to be overthrown. Amazing history, fascinating, wonderful, incredible. The next book is The Progress of the Seasons: 40 Years of Baseball in Our Town. That would be Boston, by George V. Higgins, 1990. This is a story of a Red Sox fan, his father, and his grandfather. He talks about the star players over the years who played for the Boston Red Sox, like Ted Williams, Carl Yastrzemski, Tony Conigliaro, Carlton Fisk, Wade Boggs. I wrote in my book diary, what or how could American men bond without professional sports? What would they talk about? Yeah, and I have to say, my father and I, we did have other things to talk about, but, Cleveland sports was a huge part of it. I kind of felt bad that I didn't know his father well, and his father died when I was 14. But I knew he was a Browns fan, although he was from Illinois. And my father said that his father was a fan of Red Grange back in the 1920s. The NFL. Well, I actually played for the University of Illinois, where my grandfather had gone, Doran Ray. So anyway, but I know he was a Brown. When he moved in Ohio, he was a Cleveland Browns fan. And now my son grew up in the Philippines, but he grew up as a Cleveland sports fan in the Philippines because of his father. So this is fun, as long as they're you enjoy the game, and as long as people are kind to each other, and don't let it destroy you when they lose. If they win, good. If they lose, it's okay. They're trying. Give them credit, respect for the noble opponent, respect for your team, even when they lose, even when they come short, especially when they lose the World Series, because they're all feeling bad. So anyway, wonderful book. Okay, the next book is Goosebumps, number 45, Ghost Camp by R.L. Stine, or I like to call him Bob Stine, 1986, because actually his name is Robert, although he's known as R.L. Stine. This is R.L. Stine wrote all these Goosebumps books for children. They're children's books, and they're pretty easy to read. They're entertaining, and chapters are very short, and he as you get to the end of one chapter, he writes something that leads into the next chapter, so it makes you feel like, you don't want to stop. You like to stop at the end of a chapter, but this is his strategy to keep you reading, so you finish the book, and the books aren't too long. In this book, there are two boys who are brothers, Harry and Alex, and they're at summer camp, Camp Spirit Moon. Now, apparently, and the other campers and counselors are all ghosts. Wow, so it's a scary story. Yeah, these Goosebumps, they're scary books for children. Strange things happen at this camp, ghost camp. Danger. There's danger, fear, and courage. So they're thinking, oh my God, what kind of a situation? We're in a bad situation here. They escape by not believing in a monster and the ghosts. The boys chant, "We don't believe in you," over and over, and the monster and ghosts disappear. So I thought this was a very spiritual book, because this is the thing, we need courage in life, so this is what they did. They had courage, and this ghost disappeared. Really something. In our church, we believe, in the church I'm in, Self-Realization Fellowship, we believe that the ultimate goal of every human is liberation and union with God and complete happiness forever through yoga, meditation, and right living. But before final liberation comes, there are these a monster will appear that will disappear if you ignore it, if you have courage. So I thought this was maybe you could say a reference to that thing. I know it happened to Lord Buddha before he became liberated, became a saint. Very wonderful book for children. The next book is Pitchers Do Get Lonely and Other Sports Stories by Ira Burkow, 1988. So the author talks about different athletes from different sports, like Jake LaMotta, I believe was a boxer, Denny McClain, Frenchie Fuqua, crazy guy who played for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think he was a tight end or a wide receiver. He used to wear these high-heeled shoes that had glass bottoms that had water in them, like a water compartment that he would put goldfish in. So these poor goldfish, he'd be out walking around wearing these shoes that had goldfish on in the heels. Really funny guy. Little small goldfish aquariums. Henry Aaron, Len Bias, guy who died. He was the number one draft pick in the NBA, I believe, and he died right afterward because of a drug overdose. Pete Rose, Ralph Sampson's receipt of abuse in the 1986 finals. I think he was Boston against Houston. This was a bad karma for Boston. Yeah, and Bronco Nagurski, tremendous player many years ago for the Chicago Bears. Isaiah Thomas, Dusty Rhodes, Ernie Banks, Muhammad Ali. It's a very gentle book with beautiful stories. I really enjoyed it very, very much. The next book is Chang and Eng by Darren Strauss, 2000. Wow, this is an incredible book. Yeah, this is one of the best books I've ever read. I'm not exaggerating here. It's the true story of the original Siamese twins. Siamese twins are when two siblings are born joined together at birth. And nowadays, they can separate them through surgery. And it goes back, these were, like the original Siamese twins, or at least how the name, not the original, but, they got the name of Siamese twins comes from these fellows, Chang and Eng Bunker, because they were from what's now Thailand, what back when they were growing up was called Siam, Old Siam. And they lived between 1811 and 1874. Eventually they settled in Wilkesboro, North Carolina, USA, and lived their final 32 years of their life there. They were born in a very poor family by the Mekong River father was a fisherman. And so they had this, they grew up, very simple life, rural life in old Siam, now Thailand. Eventually, the king of Siam learned about them and decided he wanted to have them for his amusement. So they were taken from their parents and became slaves of the king of Siam for 6 years. So that's from 1819, but when they were 8 years old, for 6 years until they were 1811, till they were 14. Yeah, so this was terrible. This is why people like democracy, because this guy he just took these guys away from their family, and I'm not sure. I don't think they saw their father again. I know they did see their mother a little bit. And then there was a guy this guy named, what was his name? An American guy was traveling looking to, I don't know if he was traveling for whatever reason, and he encountered them, and he actually purchased them from the king of Siam, and he wanted to display them in what they used to call a freak show. And people would pay money to see strange people, really tall people or fat people or whatever. And so they came to the United States in 1825 and were part of this traveling circus. And they became world famous, the Siamese twins. They spent 3 years in Europe traveling with this freak show, but they were slaves by this man named Mr. Hunter. They weren't being paid. They were just they were fed and so forth. But and they were pretty fed up with this. And then finally, P.T. Barnum. They made a recent movie about him, and it's we really enjoyed. And he rescued them, and he treated them very well. And he said that he bought them, or somehow he got them from this Mr. Hunter. And then they became part of his show, although he paid them, and they were free to leave whenever they wanted to. So they saved their money over the years traveling with the P.T. Barnum circus, or this whatever you call it. And then finally they decided they'd had enough. They had enough money, and they wanted to settle down. And they ended up marrying two white American sisters in North Carolina, Sarah and Adelaide Yates, in 1842. These fellows they were traveling, and these women, they were maybe in their 30s. Not too old, because they fathered 21 children. They married, they're joined together, so they can't separate it, and they could never separate. But they got married to these two sisters. They fathered 21 children and spent the rest of their lives in North Carolina. They became slave owners. This is before the Civil War, and farmers. They endured the destruction of the Civil War. They had loveless marriages. Yeah, their wives weren't really that great. And they were very kind men, abused by their wives. Chang became an alcoholic. Chang was the dominant one. And Eng joined the temperance anti-alcohol movement. So that's funny. The people who wanted to ban alcohol, mostly women who were fed up with all the problems of alcoholism in the United States, which actually led to 1920, alcohol became illegal, although it didn't solve the problem because, and then 12 years later, it became legal again. So Eng actually, since they had loveless marriage, Eng fell in love with Chang's wife. And at one point, they worked together all the time, so they kind of got irritated. Chang was dominant, and so one time they had a fight, and they tried to kill each other. And I know Chang, I think they were choking each other at one point, and they could feel one of them was choking the other. Maybe Chang was choking Eng, and then the thing is, if you killed the other one, you're going to die too, because you can't have a dead body attached to you. And medical care back then, they couldn't have really helped them. So that's why they finally, when Chang had his hands around Eng's, or maybe it was Eng had his hands around Chang's neck, because Chang was dominant and tended to be kind of hard on Eng. But anyway, he let go because he felt himself getting dizzy because he was killing himself as well. Chang died first. Eng woke up one morning and Chang was dead, and so he died that same day. I think they considered surgery, but they didn't do it. And I thought I thought Darren Strauss, this author, my gosh, what a book! And since it's actually the book is written from the perspective of Aang, so I thought I wonder if Darren Strauss is Aang Bunker reincarnated because he knows too much. And they took the name Bunker years ago. People around the world didn't have family names, so they took the name Bunker because they said you got to have a family name, and for some reason they chose that. And their descendants are like large enough, maybe 300. They have big family reunions today in North Carolina. So they enjoyed fame. They endured abuse. Chang was outgoing, funny. Aang was quiet, loved reading books. Chang's drinking affected Aang. When one of them had sex with his wife, the other had to kind of act like he would close his eyes and try not to notice or get involved. So they just kind of like to play dead because so the other one could have privacy with his wife. One time while Chang was drunk, Aang and Adelaide had romance. So imagine Chang's wife was cheating on him, and Chang was right there, drunk and asleep. The sisters were not loving. Chang and Aang were estranged for years, so they're attached to each other, but they stopped talking because they had resentments. But they did have great love for each other, despite the tension of togetherness. One funny time, Aang was giving a temperance speech, and Aang's right next to him, and Aang pulled out a bottle and started drinking. And while this was one part of their problem they had, that when Chang would get drunk, Aang would be affected. So Aang was trying to read the speech. He's standing there and he's getting drunk. Well, and these ladies were shocked. Oh my God! And this guy right in front of them. This guy's drinking. When they settled in this town in North Carolina, Wilkesboro, a mob tried to kill them because this is a racist era. They had a double wedding. So this mob of white men said, "We got to kill these guys. This is terrible." And but Chang and Aang knew martial arts, so they were able to fight back and to prevent this, to prevent getting hurt or getting killed. So this is just an incredible book, amazing, good history, the story of the original Siamese twins, and oh my gosh, I just thought it was so entertaining and what they went through, and the very, very touching. It was just I just thought it was just the best. Really enjoyed it. The next book is The News from Paraguay by Lily Tuck, 2004. This is another, I was reading great books one after the other. Really, really something. This is set in Paraguay in South America between 1854 and 1870. And, Paraguay is this landlocked country that in South America. You don't hear very much. It's real poor. And actually, even though it's landlocked, you can get there by ship because the Rio de la Plata by Buenos Aires, Argentina, runs all the way up into Paraguay and Asunción, the capital city. This is the story of the dictatorship of Francisco Solano Lopez from 1862 to 1870 and Paraguay's war, the ABU War. This crazy guy, this dictator, made war on Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay between 1865 and 1870. His common-law wife was a woman named Ella Lynch, who was from Ireland. And so they had, the couple had 5 sons, including Pancho, Enrique, Federico, Carlos Honorario, and Leopoldo. Now, in this war, see, this dictator, Lopez, he was trying to expand the territory of Paraguay. We're going to have to stop. I have a lot more to say about this book. God bless you. Hope you find a good book to read, and I'll see you next time.